Hello, my name is Josh Brannon and my project is on deep listening. Growing up, I grew up with a Caucasian Jewish father and an African American mother who grew up in some sort of Christian faith. So I was always around a whole mix of culture and religious backgrounds. I grew up and had a bar mitzvah, but also on my mother's side I often would go to different Christian celebrations of the holidays and church and such. So I experienced a large array of culture and religion. So this year when I took the class Sacred Sound, I was very excited. And when the question at first of Judith Becker's deep listening arose in our class from our reading earlier this year, I was very intrigued by such questions. This idea of trance and being really moved by music through being receptive and such, so much so that one could be fully moved and losing control of their body, really intrigued me that music could play such a powerful role in this. And after further thinking about it, I felt that it was pretty relevant and actually probably experienced in my life actually. So music was actually a huge part growing up in my life too. My grandfather was a pretty successful blues bass player, and so at the age of 8 he bought me my first guitar. So music was always really in my life too, and I always felt like a really deep connection with music. It's what I currently pursue as well, and it's what I plan to pursue in different facets through many different angles. I do love the experience of music, but this deep connection I felt with music is what I'm really focused on. And so just this idea of trancing and deep listening really hit home, because I've had experiences where I've been alone or with friends or whatever, concerts, and felt incredibly moved by the sound. So much so that I've even been alone in my room and got up and started dancing uncontrollably, and just felt such a deep connection and movement with the sound, a really deep feeling within myself. So when we learned about this idea of Judith Becker's deep listening, I was really interested if this was an experience shared by everyone, or if kind of how it was placed in the book, if it's more centered around religious practitioners. In class we watched videos of religious trancing and deep listening, like this one in particular. And I wanted to know if the feeling and experiences felt there were similar to feelings and experiences shared in a video like this. You shake my nerves and you ride my brain. Too much love got a man insane. You broke my limbs, what a thrill. Goodness gracious, great ball of fire. I let you love what I thought it was fun. Go. So my project is focused on if deep listening can produce transcendent encounters through sound with religious and secular listeners alike. In order to further examine this and find any comprehensible answers to this, I decided that I wanted to interview two people who shared deep connections with music, as well as multiple different lenses on their experience with music and sacred sound. I chose to interview two people, both who come from a traditional world religion, as we'd call it. However, one has transitioned to more of less conservative religion, and the other has converted more into the realm of atheism.
My name is Karis Chepchirchir Tirop. I am a senior at Amherst College and I'm from Kenya. Yeah. So I'm basically just gonna talk about my spiritual journey with music, part of it because music is basically a big part of my life. I remember writing my application essay to Amherst, and you know how they have like voices of the new class. One of the quotes they picked from my essay was "Music is life," and it's like the way they presented it is like cheesy and made me feel like the most basic person, but it's something I really believe in because music helps me deal with a lot. In ways that other forms of art or any other thing does not allow me. But in terms of like my spiritual life, I grew up Catholic 18 years of my life. And one thing I should basically say as a disclaimer is that Catholicism in Kenya is perhaps very different from Catholicism in the US because in terms of music, one thing that the Catholic Church in Kenya does is incorporate African forms of music in church. So in church we have drumming, and in church we have like shakers and like other traditional African instruments, and we have dancing in church. So it's very free flowing compared to like the rather rigid forms of expression that the Catholic Church in the US or like anywhere else really in the world presents as Catholicism. So I would say that when I tell people that, they find it very different from the kind of Catholicism that they've experienced. But so growing up in the Catholic Church was pretty cool for me because I enjoyed dancing. I danced in, we call it liturgical dancing. So it's like when the priest is processing or like there's the procession, you're the ones who like start off and then like make way for the altar and stuff like that. So I loved liturgical dancing and singing, and my family sing in the church choir like the entire life. And yeah, so after I graduated from high school, I was in this point in my life where I was like, I don't know if I'm particularly, you know, finding this like a satisfying way of expression because I went to a non-Catholic high school, which was a boarding school. It was more Protestant, and what came with that was other forms of music that I'd not been previously exposed to. So more like songs and like just other what you'd consider like contemporary Christian music. And I found that really cool because there was like an element of the band and just like soloing, and it was just very different from like the Catholic songs that I'd been exposed to. And I thought that appealed to me more in a deeper level. And so when I got out of high school and I was thinking about my spiritual life, because it's kind of hard to stay in the church when you're not in school, I thought what would like be best for me and like what will satisfy me spiritually. And while most people find praying and reading scripture, which is something I do as a way of connecting with God, I struggle with that because sometimes I just read text and it's like it just goes over my head. It doesn't really convict me. But when I listen to the same text but put in music, there's something about the musical arrangement, the soloing, the ad libs, and all that, that it speaks deeper into my heart. I think I connect to people's emotions when they sing too. So it's like a matter of like personal and then kind of communal worship. And so how I really went to the Anglican church was it was basically a jam session after one of my French classes, which is something I did as a gap year kind of thing. And so my friend was like, "Oh, we're going to church. Yeah, we just jam sesh and we teach each other how to play instruments." And I was like, "Oh, this sounds cool. Let's go check it out." And then I went there and just like that being in that space was like a deal breaker for me. I was like, I guess I found my church. And ever since that day, I was a part of the praise and worship team. And I found myself listening to other music from all over Africa and like from the Black diaspora and contemporary Christian music, which appealed to me in a deeper level. So I would say like it was definitely not the traditions of the Anglican church or even the doctrine that really pulled me into the church, but rather the musical scene was like my gateway to the Anglican church back home. But even then, when I came to the US, it became an entirely different situation too, because when I went to the Episcopalian church in town, I did not really appeal to my senses because it was like the kind of orthodox Christianity that a lot of people associate the Anglican and Episcopalian church with. And I ended up going to Mercy House, which is more of like, despite the fact that it's a Baptist church, it has more similarities with my Anglican church back at home because of the way they structure their service and the way they play instruments and the worship music they incorporate and stuff like that. So I think for me, really a big part of how I associate with Christianity and church and choosing fellowships and ministry is really through music, because that is like for me the deepest connection I have with God. And just to say that I feel like I find like inspiration in the weirdest like places too, because it's not necessarily only Christian music. Despite the fact that I operate in like a Christian framework, other musics for like songs from other religions have actually been like speak to me in very weird forms. Because there's this one song by Maher Zain, who's a Muslim like worshiper, which is something a lot of Muslims still argue about the place of music in Islam. But he sings a song which is called Always Be There. And basically it's like the first line is Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allah. Something of the sort. And the first time I heard that song, it really like just stopped me wherever I was. It was in high school, and like after I graduated, I kept looking for it, and I finally found it my first year at Amherst College. And it's like one of those songs, it has nothing to do with Christianity, but there's something about the way he sings and the musicality of it, and I can connect to it. And of course, it talks about God, which is, despite the fact that it's in a Muslim framework, it's the same qualities that I associate with the Christian God. And so in that moment, I just realized that music to me cuts across this like rigid like line of like Christianity and like religion that I've grown up with. And I introduced it to my family. My mom always says you'll never get like, my mom is very strict about like church things. Like I always suggest to her, Mom, I might marry a Muslim, and she flips out because that's my mom. But I actually played it for my brothers over the summer, and it's now part of their playlist, which is so funny because we are definitely a Christian home. They are all still Catholic, and here they are listening to like what you would call like an Islamic song of sorts, you know. So I think for me, definitely just experiencing music is very different from like necessarily operating in a very rigid like like church or like a religious structure, because I think there's something about musical arrangement and the way instruments, and I don't know, I'm not really that musical, like theoretical music, I've not done a lot of it, but I think there's definitely an element to the way music is arranged that appeals to a deeper sense that can actually cross boundaries that human beings have kind of formed in order to, I think, sometimes separate themselves from the possibility of experiencing something outside that framework. Because another friend of mine, Mohammed, who actually is Muslim, told me that one of his favorite songs was a Hillsong song. I was like, how do you know this? He's like, I listen to other songs. So, you know, in that like place he checked me, it was just like a moment of, I just don't, I like songs appeal to me in a different way. It does not mean that I necessarily buy into the Christian faith, but that song is a good song, and it's like, I don't know why it appeals to me. So I think it's my experience with music and spirituality definitely has allowed me to have a different relationship with God that I think if I just operated in a very rigid framework and structure, I might not have. And I think singing in chorus has also been a big part of it, because for some weird reason, I really love like Latin music, and Gregorian chants appeal to me. Like the other day, there's a song concert choir was singing for Vespers. It's called Ubi Caritas, and it's like literally you can see the church. Like it's just one of those songs you just imagine 13th century churches in, and for some weird reason, it just appealed to me in the deepest of senses, despite the fact at first I didn't even know the language, like, because I don't speak Latin. I don't know who speaks Latin, but I really do not know the language. But the first words are like, Ubi caritas et amo. There's something about just that arrangement. It's like, regardless of what language you speak, it just pierces your heart in that moment. And I don't know, it's just, it flows, and the way the choir sang it, it was so beautiful. I remember just like sitting there, the first time they sang it before Vespers, I was like, this is absolutely my favorite song. Then they sang it again in Vespers, and I was like, yes. And I found it online, actually. I went to Spotify and found it, and it's like now part of my playlist, and I just play it because it's just so beautiful. And despite the fact that I don't really understand the words, yeah, it works. So just in thinking of my experience and like those of other people I've encountered when we talk about music, I think for me what it does, it shows that spirituality and just the idea of like music and religion and like sacred spaces is really very flexible, and it allows us to have a deeper relationship with the higher being or whatever we appeal to as a spiritual force in our life, than if we operate in like structures that resist that. Because I think for me, growing up in the Catholic Church, despite the fact it was very different and perhaps a little bit more flexible than the US, there was still like a very structured way of mass and like incorporating specific attributes of God and the Bible, and very like operating in a very strict church sense. But then when I move out of that, I find myself exploring different ways of interpreting God's word and interpreting the role of music in the church and stuff like that. Because I think at the end of the day, what we realize, music is way older than people like want to think. Because I feel like some of the interpretations in Christianity and even the Catholic Church is if more recent compared to like the existence of music. So I feel like it's definitely for me one of the deeper and the oldest ways that people can actually experience God, so that when lyrics and when all else is taken away, there's always still sound. You can still find a sound coming out of somewhere and you can connect with it, because and you don't even have to necessarily know what that means. It's a feeling. And for me, that's the deepest part of experiencing God. When the feeling just overwhelms you, that's when like you've had a deep encounter, which is something that I strive for every day in my Christian life. So, yeah, thank you.
I'm Shantam Jha from Nepal. I am 20 years old currently, a freshman at Amherst College. So, yeah. mm, I was brought up in a Hindu family. My parents are Hindu, and my parents never really took care of me when I was a kid because they were busy. But of course, I had other relatives to do that for me. And actually, these other relatives are kind of more religious, more of a Hindu than my parents are. They practice religious activities more sincerely, more concernedly, mm, and also fancy themselves a lot of musical compositions that has been in their hands since forever, including all sorts of the Hindu music for the god Shiva, for Lord Krishna, and even the Buddhism chants. So I'm saying I've been familiar with all these kind of things since the time I was a child, and I grew up with these kind of things. So maybe if, like, for example, my little cousin who barely understands what music is would be like given an oil massage while her older relative would be singing out um, the 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 words, the religious music to the kid, and then that's how the kid grows up, and that's how I did too. Now thinking back on where I am and how that might have impacted the way I perceive sound, the way I perceive music is, I think it is a product of culture, and it has been ingrained in me quite deeply. For example, I like to meditate. For example, when I do meditate, the only words I'm kind of following are automatically the words Om. That's because that's what I've been learning since forever, and that's how I've learned to start my meditation all the time. Of course, I could have found a substitute now that I call myself an atheist, but see, it's ingrained, it's a part of me. It has been a part of my culture and my identity since since the time I was born, because I was born into this family. But occasionally I realized that the ultimate answers to the universe, or whatever, the ultimate truth, is not behind any religious group, any religious tradition, Hindu, Christian, Muslim, none of those. But realizing that we have more to learn, we have more to find out, I consider myself an atheist. And during that transition, I wouldn't say the way I perceive music has necessarily changed much. because of course it's been a part of me since forever, but I believe something has changed. Let me explain. Like I said, whenever I go go deep into myself, the Om vibe just resonates within me, and that's how my thoughts proceed, and I lose myself to nature or whatever that way. And now, I kind of, now that I have to, like, I'm in this position where I'm thinking to equate that kind of feeling with my transition of being an atheist. I kind of see the similarity being the fact that I go into the same place I would have, if I practiced meditation as a child. I feel like I still go to the same place, the place where in like festivals and all, my house, the entire house would be booming with religious music. People are chanting mantras. My grandfather chanting mantras starting 6 a.m. in the morning for his morning puja, for his what's called the morning prayer kind of. And like through all of those experiences, through all of those things, I think I go back to the same sort of feeling, but not necessarily through the same words that I derived from when I was a child. Now what I have, the medium of access that I go through to reach the similar state of mind, are different words, but somehow have the same mechanism of traveling through the through what I call my soul, my mind, or whatever, how I perceive it, how I go through it, how I am one with the universe in that way. So that's one thing, not necessarily the words, but definitely the same vibe, or through different words, the same vibe, definitely. Another thing I could say is that like the way I see it, maybe I wasn't mature enough to fully resonate my being through the words that I used to get in my home, through the music, through the religious, through the Hindu Shiva, Krishna, through the Hindu music that I found in my home, that I always listened to in my home. Maybe I wasn't fully mature to actually go deep in that. Maybe I wasn't actually mature to like sit down and meditate on that. But now that I've matured quite a bit through the years, I find myself going back to the same vibe, if you mean. Like, it's like I, through a different mechanism, I'm going back to the same place, because the way I experience it, I see some fundamental commonality between the experience of listening to any sort of music now, and the probably the experience I would have had if I meditated in my home, listening to all the music that I was introduced to, all the Hindu music I was introduced to. And the way I see it now, and how I know I go back to the same place, although through different routes, is that it is it of course is difficult to explain experience in words, but then I know I go to the same place because, like I said, whenever I start meditating, I get the Om resonated throughout my meditation, and all these things I don't have to choose to do. These come naturally to me. And how I actually perceive sound now is very similar to the way I would have back then. And I know that because it is the same feeling. And I know it's the same feeling because, like, it's sort of like it gives your anchor of sanity a tug, kind of. Like, it's like your sense of self dissolves whenever you're meditating. And I sometimes like to listen to other kind of music when I meditate too. So it's just using different forms of music to go back to the same thing. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I do believe that my experience now has is the same as what my grandfather would have perceived if he actually, the way I see it, the way I see world now, if he actually perceived the way I do, the way I perceive this world. I believe my grandfather or whoever was chanting music and all the mantras being chanted during festivals and otherwise, just the way he perceived sound, the actual purpose of him waking up every morning to chant prayers and do puja, it's called like a prayer kind of. I think he was also guided by the feeling that I share, and I know that because the entire purpose of of delving into the sacred sound is to be common with the universe, and I know that because I have felt it and not necessarily can explain the evidence in terms of words. But then let me just say how the experiences both my grandfather and I share through music, but through different kinds of sounds. His would be chanting mantras. Mine is just listening to like a genre of music that I like. In any case, I believe both of us reach the same place. Both of us reach the same place, and that is the purpose of delving into music on its own. Because human life, it's the same everywhere. If we close our eyes for 3 seconds, we know that our consciousness is transforming, is transitioning through moments from one moment to the other. And that is what we realize, that is what we know. And in that state of mind, when we perceive sound, the way it changes the sense of self that we have is very unique to whatever kind of sound is used to create that experience, because the thing that's fundamentally the same is the very experience. And now I believe how that does is like through one's own action and words, through one's own, like, since the brain can react and respond to its own stimuli, I believe if one actually by choice delves into the music, like my grandfather did, like I do now, you have to reach the same experience because it's the same thing that's happening here in the brain. Now, what I believe is happening when you are like out of your body essentially, and when you're perceiving this sound, this sacred sound, your experience correlates to one having been one with the universe essentially, and outside of your body, like within the realm of your own self. The self dissolving, ego dissolution. You have no ego about yourself, but you realize that you are a part of something huge, something big, which is the very universe, very existence, all of things, all of the things. So maybe it was more religious for him, and I think that was the kind of reward, one could say, he found, which made him wake up every day and also be a part of such a community so deep that he could transmit those thoughts to his child and then to me, and that's how it continues. But even though we're in different places now and perceiving things differently, we're essentially at the same place, because both of us are a part of that self-dissolution. Both of us are a part of the entire self that we go into. So although through different mediums, we're essentially reaching the same place. The very fact that music or any kind of sound has all its in all its intricacies, in all its intricacies and all its nuances, just goes like a sprinkle here, a sprinkle there, some sort of a musical experience, some pitch booming, some whatever. So all what it's trying to do, or all that I think it does, and this is the mechanism for everything being the same, is that it dissolves the sense of self in such a way that the way we see consciousness transforming from moment to moment right now is the way we are perceiving ourself. And through that music, through the the medium of that music, we are losing ourselves in nature. We are letting ourselves go. And music, the sound, the sacred sound that we chant, that we pay attention to, that we personalize, is like the only friend that has been with us throughout our experience. It's the only thing that we can casually attach our like self-worth to, because that is the only thing that is like transformed with us. As we delve into that unknown realm, the only thing that stays with us is the very experience of the music, and that may enhance the experience, that may make you more aware of it. Well, in any case, it works.
For Carice, music always spoke to her on a deeper level, and when she transitioned from being Catholic into being Anglican, she even further explored this idea of sound and bringing her to a deeper encounter with what she perceives as being God through many different backgrounds and types of music, which even strengthened her idea in this that all sound really, regardless of boundaries, can bring us to this deep and deep presence, which for her she encounters as being God. For Carice, the sacredness of the music lies much deeper beneath the lyrics and provokes such a deep feeling, and this feeling is what she strives for in her Anglican faith, such encounters with the higher being, with the higher self, God, as she likes to call it. Shantam believes the sacredness of sound lies within the deep vibrations it emits, and for him that feeling has not wavered through his transitions of being a Hindu to now an atheist. Through such sonic waves, Shantam is brought closer to the greater spirit, which he believes is embedded within all of reality, and allows him to access this deeper understanding and truth of the microcosms that surround us. For Shantam, he believes that the chants he spoke of his grandfather reciting ultimately brought him to the same place that Shantam experiences currently through his atheistic beliefs, through sound as well. That ultimately this same place is that ultimately they're being brought to this same deeper feeling, the same deeper understanding, although it is through different vehicles, different lenses, it ultimately resides in this same place. And so for Shantam, this really helps promote this idea that deep listening and deep connections and experience with sound is fundamental to the human condition, regardless of the different labels or categories we place ourselves in. Through analyzing both interviews, I'm led to believe that my idea is correct about deep listening being a fundamental nature to the human condition. Deep listening, regardless of the different secular or religious category you're under, brings the human to a deeper state of consciousness, to a deeper feeling that it promotes. And as shown through the interviews, such feeling, as both people described, allows them to further analyze and understand the interwoven and interconnected web that we call reality. And for one, it appears through the lens as this religious God that they believe, and for another, it appears as still this mysterious source that is embedded within everything that we experience. Thank you.